Standing by the window, I let the morning sunlight warm my face as I sipped my coffee. My small apartment in the Boston suburbs was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside. Life had been tough, but I had learned to bear it. Despite everything, I refused to let it break me. "Mom, I can't tie my tie." My 8-year-old son, Ethan, called from the living room, frustration in his voice. I turned to see him struggling with a red tie, his fingers tangled in the fabric, his little brows furrowed in concentration. I smiled, kneeling in front of him. "Here, let me help you," I said, gently fixing his tie. As I worked, my chest tightened. Today wasn't just any day, it was the last place I wanted to be. My ex-husband's sister, Caroline, was getting married. For the past 10 years, I had worked as a waitress at Maplewood Diner. Long hours, little pay, and the occasional rude customer were my daily reality, but I never complained. I had a son to raise, and he was my entire world. 3 years ago, my life crumbled when I discovered my husband, Andrew, was having an affair with his secretary. Andrew, the rising star in a prestigious company, had decided I wasn't good enough anymore. "I want a divorce," he had said flatly, as if he were discussing a business deal. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged. I had simply packed my things, taken Ethan, and left. "Mom, do we really have to go?" Ethan asked quietly, his small hands playing with the hem of his shirt. I sighed. "It's your aunt's wedding. We should be polite." He hesitated. "But Grandma doesn't like you." My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. Some people don't understand each other, but family is still family. That was a lie. Andrew's family had never accepted me. His mother, Margaret, made it clear from the start that I wasn't good enough. Caroline wasn't much better. She had spent years reminding me that I was beneath her, and now she was marrying into wealth, securing her spot in high society. I had almost declined the invitation, but when Ethan whispered, "I want to see Dad," I knew I had to go. Dressed in a simple navy dress, I took one last look in the mirror before grabbing my purse. I never wore anything flashy, but somehow, simplicity only made me stand out more. Taking Ethan's hand, we stepped out into the cold morning and into a waiting taxi. The Grand Monarch Hotel was a palace of glass and gold, towering above us as we arrived. Luxury cars lined the entrance, and the air smelled of fresh roses and expensive perfume. At the reception desk, a woman in a sleek black dress scanned the guest list, her smile faltering when she saw my name. Mrs. Harper, please wait a moment." I frowned. A second staff member joined her, whispering behind the desk. I felt Ethan squeeze my hand. "Mom?" he asked, his voice small. I smiled at him. "It's okay, sweetheart." After a long, uncomfortable pause, the woman forced a smile. "Right this way." The grand ballroom was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a stunning view of the city, and the entire hall buzzed with conversation and laughter. Waiters moved elegantly between tables, carrying trays of champagne. Then Ethan stopped abruptly. "Mom, what's this?" I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. The elegantly arranged name cards sat on each table. Harper family, Wallace family, Kingston family. But my card mine read, "Single mother waitress." Ethan's single mother's child. A deep silence filled my ears. My hands trembled as I flipped the cards over, hoping it was some kind of mistake. My pulse roared in my ears. The humiliation burned through me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to grab Ethan and run. But then I looked at my son. His small fists were clenched, his face a mix of confusion and anger. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, forcing my voice to stay even. "Just a bad joke." Taking a deep breath, I sat down, my fingers tightening around the fabric of my dress. My heart pounded as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then, the sound of heels clicking against the floor made my stomach churn. Margaret approached, wrapped in an elegant silver gown, pearls glinting at her neck. A smirk played on her lips. "Oh, Charlotte, you actually came," she said, feigning surprise. "How unexpected." She barely glanced at Ethan before turning to greet another guest. My nails dug into my palm, but I stayed silent. For Ethan. Then the pipe organ played, signaling the start of the ceremony. Andrew entered first, standing tall beside the groom. My ex-husband polished, successful, and not sparing me a single glance. Then Caroline appeared, glowing in an extravagant white gown. her smile radiant. The guests sighed in admiration. The perfect wedding, the perfect couple, the perfect family. But they had no idea that their perfect day was about to come crashing down. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, just not mine. Caroline beamed as she walked down the aisle, her lace-covered train trailing behind her. Guests sighed in admiration as she reached the altar, where James, her perfect groom, waited with a dazzling smile. I sat still, my back straight, my fingers gripping the napkin in my lap. Beside me, Ethan fidgeted. He wasn't watching the bride. His eyes flickered to Andrew, his father, who stood among the groomsmen. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Dad keeps looking at us." I followed his gaze. Andrew's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture, hesitation, perhaps? Guilt? Whatever it was, he made no move to approach us. "Just ignore it, sweetheart," I murmured, squeezing his hand. The vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and when Caroline and James finally kissed, the room erupted in applause. The perfect fairy tale, carefully crafted for an audience, and yet something felt off. As guests filtered toward the reception hall, I took a steadying breath. Just a few hours. Then, we're gone. Ethan and I found our way to our table, placed in the farthest corner of the ballroom. I wasn't surprised. Out of sight, out of mind. But as I pulled out Ethan's chair, a shadow loomed over me. Margaret. "Oh, Charlotte," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I hope the seating arrangements aren't uncomfortable." We wanted to be as accommodating as possible. I forced a polite smile. "Of course." Very thoughtful. Margaret's lips curled. "Good. I'd hate for you to feel out of place." Before I could respond, the sound of a champagne glass clinking silenced the chatter. Margaret turned with satisfaction, striding toward the stage. The microphone crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us on this special day," she announced, her voice dripping with practiced elegance. "As we celebrate my beloved daughter's wedding, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the people who made this day possible." Applause filled the room as she thanked the wedding planner, the florists, the caterers, but then her gaze landed on me. "And of course," she continued, "we have a special guest tonight." My stomach twisted. "Charlotte," Margaret called sweetly, "would you stand?" A slow, suffocating silence spread through the room. Every head turned toward me. My pulse pounded in my ears. Margaret's expression was all amusement, her smile barely concealing her pleasure. She had planned this. I swallowed my pride and stood. Margaret's grin widened. "Many of you may not know, but Charlotte has been working tirelessly for years as a waitress at Maplewood Diner. A truly noble profession. Since you're such an experienced server, my dear, why don't you lend the staff a hand tonight?" A few people gasped. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, but then a low chuckle, then another. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. My fingers curled into fists. Heat rushed to my cheeks. "Margaret," someone murmured, "that's..." "Oh, don't be shy, Charlotte." Margaret cut them off. "It's only fair you contribute to the celebration." Ethan's chair scraped against the floor. I turned, and my breath caught. He was standing. His small hands trembled at his sides, but his face was set in quiet fury. "Stop laughing at my mom." The laughter died instantly. Ethan took a step forward, his voice clear, unwavering. "You don't know her. You don't know how hard she works, how much she does for me. You don't know anything." My heart pounded as Ethan turned his gaze to Margaret. His next words were steady, powerful. "You don't get to treat her like this." A murmur spread through the crowd. Margaret's face darkened. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said through clenched teeth, "this is an adult conversation." "No, it's not," he shot back. "It's bullying." Silence. Margaret's expression flickered anger, embarrassment, something else. But Ethan wasn't done. He turned to the groom's family, to James, who watched the scene unfold with confusion. "Mr. James," Ethan called, "I have a present for you." James blinked. "A present?" Ethan nodded, reaching into his pocket. A phone. He held it up, his thumb hovering over the screen. Margaret stiffened. "Ethan, I don't think." Click. The sound of a recording filled the air. First, the rustling of fabric, then a familiar voice, Caroline's. I can't wait to see Charlotte's face when she realizes what we wrote on her name card. It'll be priceless. A stunned hush fell over the room. Margaret's on board too. Caroline's voice continued. She said if Charlotte's dumb enough to show up, we might as well have some fun. A gasp. Caroline shot to her feet. "That's enough!" she shrieked. Ethan ignored her. He adjusted the microphone stand, his voice calm. "That's not all." Another voice crackled to life. Andrew's. "Be careful, Caroline. If people find out about the baby." The room exploded. James turned to Caroline, his face drained of color. "What?" Caroline lunged toward Ethan, panic twisting her features. "You little brat, give me that." James blocked her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to Ethan. "What did you say?" Ethan swallowed. "I heard my dad talking to Aunt Caroline about the baby 3 days ago when I stopped by her place." My breath caught. Margaret's face turned white. "No," Caroline whispered. "He's lying. This is a child's imagination." James's father stood abruptly. "James," he said sharply, "let's go." James didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Caroline. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low. Caroline was frozen, her lips parted, but no words came out. Margaret shot to her daughter's defense. "This is a misunderstanding," she barked. "You're ruining my daughter's wedding over some nonsense." James's mother placed a hand on her son's arm. "We need to leave." Finally, James moved. He reached for his ring, slowly, deliberately, and then, without a word, he pulled it off. It hit the table with a soft metallic clink. Caroline let out a strangled gasp. "James, please." He turned away. The guests erupted in whispers. Some gasped. Others covered their mouths in shock. Margaret's voice cut through the noise. "Andrew," she snapped, "fix this." But Andrew said nothing. For the first time, he looked at me. Really looked, but it was too late. I turned to Ethan and took his small hand in mine. "Let's go, sweetheart." Together, we walked toward the exit, leaving the chaos behind. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool. Ethan's grip tightened around mine. "Did I do the wrong thing?" he asked quietly. I knelt down and cupped his face. "No, honey," I said softly. "You did exactly what was right." He exhaled, his small shoulders relaxing. "Good." As we stepped into a waiting cab, I glanced back at the hotel one last time. The life I had once been part of, the life I had been cast out of, was crumbling. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The city lights blurred past the cab window, the hum of the engine filling the silence between us. Ethan sat beside me, his small hands resting in his lap, his expression unreadable. I reached over and squeezed his fingers gently. "You okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, but I could tell his mind was still back at that wedding, in that ballroom filled with gasps, whispers, and shattered illusions. "I'm just thinking," he said finally. "About what?" "About Dad, and Aunt Caroline, and everything." His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind his words. I took a slow breath. "I know today was a lot, sweetheart." Ethan turned to look at me, his blue eyes serious. "Did I ruin everything?" I smiled, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "No, you told the truth, and sometimes the truth is uncomfortable." His small shoulders relaxed slightly, but he still seemed deep in thought. "So, what happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What happened now? I didn't have an answer. The cab pulled up in front of our apartment building, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Grand Monarch Hotel. The lobby was dimly lit, the elevator slow and creaky. As I turned the key in the lock, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Home. I set my purse down and turned to Ethan. "How about some grilled cheese sandwiches before bed?" His face lit up for the first time that evening. "With tomato soup?" "Of course." We moved around the kitchen, the simple routine grounding us. Butter sizzling in the pan, the rich scent of melted cheese. This was real. This was us. Halfway through his sandwich, Ethan spoke again. "Do you think Dad's mad at me?" I hesitated. "I don't know." I wouldn't lie to him. I knew Andrew. He was probably furious, not just at Ethan, but at me, at the fact that we had walked out of that wedding while his world burned behind us. But that wasn't our problem. Not anymore. Just as I was about to clear the plates, my phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen. "Andrew." I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Charlotte." His voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk." I glanced at Ethan, who was pretending not to listen but was clearly hanging on to every word. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied, a sharp breath on the other end. "You let him humiliate my family." I clenched my jaw. I let him tell the truth. Silence. Then, Quieter. I didn't know he recorded it. He's 8, Andrew. He's observant. Maybe if you had paid attention, you would have realized that. Another pause. Then we need to meet. Tomorrow. I work tomorrow. After your shift, I sighed, rubbing my temple. Fine. As I hung up, Ethan looked at me expectantly. Dad wants to see you? Yeah, I admitted. His lips pressed together. Are you going to let him yell at you? I smiled at his fierce protectiveness. No, baby. I'm just going to listen. He nodded, satisfied, and took another bite of his sandwich. The next day, my shift at the diner crawled by. The usual customers came and went, some friendly, some impatient. But my mind was elsewhere. By the time I stepped outside, the evening air was crisp. Andrew was already waiting, leaning against his car. He looked different, not as confident as usual. There were dark circles under his eyes. Charlotte, he said as I approached. Andrew, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to say? I crossed my arms. I don't know, Andrew. Maybe an apology would be a start. For what? For moving on? For finding someone else? For treating me like garbage? For letting your family humiliate me? For being so ashamed of me that you let them treat our son like he didn't matter? His jaw tightened. That's not true. I let out a sharp laugh. Isn't it? Because it sure felt like it when Margaret labeled me single mother, waitresses at that wedding. And you just stood there. He looked away. I didn't know about that. But you didn't stop it either. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, he exhaled. You're right. I should have. I blinked. I wasn't expecting him to admit that. Caroline's life is ruined. He continued. James left. His family is demanding she pay them back for the wedding. Margaret is spiraling, trying to control the damage. And me? He let out a bitter laugh. My career is hanging by a thread. Something in his voice made me pause. Why? He hesitated. James's father is an investor in my company. And let's just say he's not happy about what happened. A flicker of something pity? No, not pity, just understanding. Actions have consequences, I said simply. Andrew looked at me for a long moment. Do you think I'm a bad father? I sighed. I think you were a bad husband. And, I think you've been a distant father. But that can change if you wanted to. He nodded slowly as if absorbing my words. I want to try. With Ethan. Then prove it. Show up for him. Put him first. He looked down, then back at me. And us? I shook my head. That ship sailed, Andrew. He swallowed, nodding. Okay. There was something final in the way we stood there, in the way the wind carried the last remnants of our past away. Goodbye, Charlotte. I watched as he got into his car and drove off. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved. I was just done. When I got home, Ethan was waiting. How did it go? I ruffled his hair. Your dad wants to try. Ethan considered this, then nodded. Okay. We didn't need more words. We had each other. And that was enough. The days after the wedding passed in a strange kind of calm. The kind that comes after a storm, but before the consequences truly settle. I went to work, Ethan went to school, and for a while, it felt like things were normal. But normal was never meant to last. It started with a phone call. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed on the counter. I checked the screen. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Charlotte. A familiar voice rasped. Margaret. The first tensed. Of all the people I expected to hear from, she was at the bottom of the list. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice even. A pause. Then we need to talk. I let out a dry laugh. I don't think we do. You might want to reconsider. She snapped. Unless you want things to get worse for you. That got my attention. Is that a threat? She sighed, clearly irritated. I don't have time for games, Charlotte. Meet me at the Grand Monarch tomorrow at noon. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at my phone. Why would Margaret, who had spent years pretending I didn't exist, suddenly want to talk? The only way to find out was to show up. The next afternoon, I stepped into the same hotel where everything had fallen apart days before. The lobby was quieter now, the grandeur muted without the wedding crowd. Margaret sat in a corner booth, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. She looked tired. For the first time, she didn't have that air of superiority, the smugness that had always clung to her like perfume. I slid into the seat across from her. I'm here. Talk. She pursed her lips, studying me like I was an opponent she had underestimated. Do you have any idea what you've done? I arched a brow. Told the truth? You humiliated this family, she hissed. Caroline's engagement is over. James's family is threatening legal action. And my son, she exhaled sharply. Andrew is being pushed out of his company. I felt no sympathy. None of that is my fault. She laughed bitterly. Don't play innocent. You let that boy expose everything. You stood there and watched while he destroyed us. My hands curled into fists under the table. Destroyed you? No. You did that yourselves. Margaret's eyes flashed with something unreadable. It doesn't matter now. What matters is what happens next. I leaned back. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? She hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. She slid it across the table. What is this? Money, she said stiffly. Enough for you to take Ethan and go, far away, somewhere that won't continue embarrassing this family. I blinked. Then I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that had her bristling. You really think you can buy me off? I shook my head. That's pathetic, even for you. Her nostrils flared. You'd be smart to take it. I pushed the envelope back. I don't want your money. Margaret's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. I stood. No, Margaret. The mistake was yours. You thought you could control people like puppets. You thought your name, your money, your status made you untouchable. But you were wrong. Her expression darkened. You'll regret this. I leaned in slightly, meeting her gaze. I regret ever letting my son think he had a family who cared about him. With that, I turned and walked away. That night, as I sat on the couch watching Ethan build a Lego tower, my phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen surprised me. James. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep sigh. Charlotte, I know this is unexpected, but can we talk? I frowned. About what? He hesitated. Caroline. And everything. I glanced at Ethan, who was focused on his Legos, then stepped into the kitchen. Why would I want to talk about Caroline? Because I think you deserve to know what happened after you left. I leaned against the counter. I'm listening. James let out another breath. After the wedding, Caroline tried to convince me that Ethan had made it all up, that he was confused. I rolled my eyes. Classic. But the recording, the things she said, his voice turned bitter. I knew she was lying. I just needed proof. Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. And she's pregnant. I already knew that. And she tried to say it was mine. My breath caught. What? James let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Yeah. Said she was just scared to tell me before the wedding. That she wanted to surprise me after we were married. I could only imagine the level of desperation it took to spin that lie. So what did you do? I asked. I asked for a paternity test. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. She refused, he continued, which told me everything I needed to know. I exhaled. And now, I canceled everything. The wedding expenses, the apartment I bought for us, everything. He paused. But that's not why I called. I frowned. Then why? To thank you. That caught me off guard. For what? For not letting them win. His voice was sincere. For raising a son brave enough to do what most adults wouldn't. Warmth spread through my chest. I don't know what's next for me, he admitted. But I know one thing: I dodged a bullet. I smiled. That you did. There was a pause. Take care, Charlotte. You too, James. As I hung up, I looked over at Ethan. He had finished his Lego tower and was grinning proudly. Look, Mom, he beamed. I made it strong so it won't fall. I walked over, ruffling his hair. Just like you, sweetheart. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. And for the first time in forever, I knew our story was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle. The scandal surrounding the wedding had faded from daily gossip, but I knew Margaret and Caroline were still dealing with the fallout. James had officially cut all ties, and Andrew had finally learned what it felt like to lose control. I focused on my life, my son, and the quiet moments that had once felt so far away. But just as I thought the past had loosened its grip, another unexpected turn arrived, this time in the form of a letter. I found it in my mailbox after work, an elegant envelope with no return address. My stomach twisted as I carefully peeled it open, unfolding the thick, expensive paper inside. Charlotte, I know I am the last person you want to hear from, but I ask you to read this to the end. I have had time to reflect on what happened, and the way I treated you over the years. I won't make excuses. I won't ask for forgiveness. But I will acknowledge that I failed as a mother-in-law, and a grandmother. Andrew has lost everything. He may not say it, but I know he regrets the way he let things unfold. Caroline, despite everything, is still my daughter, and I will stand by her. But I no longer have the strength to fight battles that should have never been waged. If nothing else, please know that Ethan is always welcome in my home, should he ever wish to visit. Margaret. I let out a slow breath. A month ago, I might have been angry, but now I just felt tired. Margaret hadn't apologized. Not really. But this was the closest she'd ever come to admitting she was wrong. I folded the letter and set it aside. I didn't need closure from her. I had already made my peace. The only thing that mattered was the life I was building with Ethan. That evening, as I helped Ethan with his homework, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Andrew. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to answer. Hello? A long pause. Then, I saw the letter. I exhaled. And, I don't know, he admitted. She's never said anything like that before. She's getting old, Andrew, I said simply. She's tired. He hesitated. Ethan, does he want to see her? I looked over at my son, who was scribbling away on his math worksheet, his tongue poking out in concentration. That's his decision, I said. I won't force him. Andrew was quiet for a moment. I want to do better, he said finally. I believed him. But belief and trust were two different things. Then show up, I told him. Not just today, not just next week, always. A slow exhale. Okay. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. Life moved forward. Slowly, steadily, in ways I never expected. One afternoon, while wiping down the diner counter, my manager, Linda, approached me with a thoughtful expression. Charlotte, she said, have you ever thought about moving up here? I blinked. What? She gestured to the staff schedule pinned to the wall. You've been here for 10 years. You know this place better than anyone. I'm looking for a deputy manager. I stared at her. Me? She smiled. You deserve it. A warmth spread through my chest. I had spent so long just surviving that I hadn't thought about moving forward. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream. A few days later, after picking Ethan up from school, I took a detour. Where are we going? He asked. I smiled. You'll see. Minutes later, we pulled up in front of the local community college. Ethan frowned. Mom? I turned to him. I signed up for classes. I said, nutrition and business. His eyes widened. Wait, really? I nodded. I always wanted to do it. I just never thought I could. He grinned. You totally can. I ruffled his hair. Think so? I know so. And for the first time in years, I did too. That night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Ethan leaned against me. Mom, yeah, we're gonna be okay, right? I kissed the top of his head. We already are. The past had shaped us, but it didn't define us. Our future was ours to build, and we were just getting started. The seasons changed, and so did we. Autumn arrived with crisp air and golden leaves, and with it, a shift in our lives that felt like a fresh start. My new role as deputy manager at the diner came with long hours, but for the first time in a long time, my work felt like progress, not just survival. Ethan thrived. His confidence had grown, his teachers praised his sharp mind, and he had found a love for storytelling. He'd sit at the kitchen table, scribbling in his notebook, lost in worlds of his own making. One evening, as I was grading one of my own assignments from my college course, he slid a page toward me. What's this? I asked, picking it up. My story, he grinned. It's about a boy and his mom. They go through hard stuff, but in the end, they win. I swallowed the lump in my throat. That sounds like a great story, he nodded, because it's true. And it was. A few weeks later, Andrew called. I got a job, he said. That's good, I replied cautiously. I had to take a pay cut, he admitted. After everything. Well, let's just say I burned a lot of bridges. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just said, at least you're trying. He hesitated. I want to see Ethan more. I know I don't deserve to ask, but I want to be better. I sighed, rubbing my temple. That's up to him. There was silence on the other end. Finally, he said, Thank you, Charlotte. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Margaret never reached out again. Ethan never asked to visit her. Some wounds never fully heal, and some doors stay closed. That was okay. We didn't need them. We had built something better, a future we chose for ourselves. One cold December evening, Ethan and I sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift down onto the quiet street. "Mom," he said suddenly. "Yeah? What do you want to do next?" I smiled, wrapping my arm around him. "Something big," I said. He grinned. "Me too." And in that moment, I knew whatever came next. We were ready, because we had already won. Story 2. In a peaceful neighborhood in the suburbs of Boston, a tiny home stood in the Maplewood district. Elizabeth Collins was sitting near the window, staring into space from the manuscript she was holding. She had worked as a children's book editor at Northern Books, a local publishing company, for more than 10 years. Her dark hair appeared to glitter with the few gray strands in the light. Even though she was exhausted, her kind and understanding eyes didn't alter. "What time do you plan to get home today, Richard?" About 7 o'clock, she phoned her husband from the living room. "I believe," Richard said, hurrying through his meal. "I have a crucial meeting today." He worked for his father's real estate firm as an executive. He always exuded success with his well-groomed hair and rather angular features. During their undergraduate years, Elizabeth and Richard had met in a reading group. At the time, they expressed their aspirations and vowed to one day explore the world together. Now, after 7 years of marriage, that vow had been discreetly put on hold. The Morrison family's customs and expectations have progressively confined their life. "Your hormone injection is almost due. Are you okay?" Elizabeth saw that Richard's generosity was tinged with frustration and worry. They began fertility treatments 3 years ago, since they had desired children since they were married, but had not been fortunate enough to have any. According to the doctor, there is a chance that unexplained infertility is impeding pregnancy, but no serious problems have been discovered. "I'm all right. By now, I'm accustomed to it." Elizabeth grinned, but her eyes were still hazy. The Morrisons, Richard's family, were regarded as an old, established family in the community. Harold, his father, was a severe guy with salt and pepper hair and a lifetime of furrows between his brows. He was a major player in the larger Boston real estate market, as the founder of Morrison Real Estate. Grace, his mother, held a prominent position in the community, organizing several charitable functions and eliciting admiration as Mrs. Morrison. But underneath her elegant exterior was a hard, critical gaze and harsh, merciless remarks. Richard has 2 siblings. Victoria, his sister, was the director of sales for their father's business and was so skilled that she was referred to as the Iron Lady. Bradley, his younger brother, was employed at the nearby hospital as an internist. The only member of the Morrison family that showed Elizabeth kindness was him. Elizabeth's connection with the Morrison family has been problematic since the start of her marriage. Her heart was continuously hurt by the jabs and unintentional criticism, particularly from Grace and Victoria. Beth will ultimately spend more time at home, but for now she works at a tiny local publishing business. Every time she presented Elizabeth to her friends, Grace would remark something that made Elizabeth feel as though her profession was being minimized. She truly doesn't come from a background that would fit in with the Morrison family, does she? On one occasion, Elizabeth had unintentionally heard Grace talking on the phone with a friend. Elizabeth's mother had died young, and her father had taught English in high school. Her grandmother, Edith, who had also passed away 5 years prior, had reared her. That was insufficient for the Morrison family's pedigree. Victoria wasn't much better. She consistently denigrated Elizabeth's work as an editor at Thanksgiving and Christmas family get-togethers. For example, "Beth, do jobs like yours even have salary increases?" she might ask Elizabeth, and all with a smile on your face. Richard, meantime, found himself torn between his family and his wife. At first, he reassured his wife, telling her not to worry about them. That's how they always are. But with time, he started to support his family more frequently. Particularly when they began reproductive treatments, Grace and Victoria's strain increased. Strong sons have traditionally come from the Morrison family. "To think that there's no child to continue our bloodline," Grace would lament. Even though such statements were never fully spoken, their significance was always evident. Victoria was blunter. "I still run the business and have 2 kids." She would constantly brag about her accomplishments to Elizabeth. Elizabeth had vented her annoyances to her husband, but Richard's responses were increasingly icy. "Victoria may say that, but she doesn't intend any harm. Mother and the others are only worried for the Morrison family's future. He would protect his family no matter what." And to today. While she waited for her fertility injection, Elizabeth sat by herself and read a manuscript in silence. She could hear children laughing in the distance, and the tree outside the window was swaying softly in the early fall air. There was an odd unease in her heart on Elizabeth's birthday morning. Before he hurried off to work, Richard gave her a tiny gift package. "Cheers to your birthday." He kissed her gently on the cheek and whispered, "Let's celebrate properly tonight." Elizabeth was sitting on the sofa in the living room, revising a novel, when the phone rang. When she saw Grace Morrison on the television, she paused for a second before responding to Elizabeth. "Cheers to your birthday." The brightness of Grace's voice was unusual, because it is a wonderful day. "Tonight, I would like to join you in celebrating. At 7, let's get together at Chateau Bloom as a family." Elizabeth could not speak. A single meal at Chateau Bloom, one of Boston's most exclusive French restaurants, might cost as much as her daily wage. Grace had never celebrated her birthday with such a lavish show. "Oh, I'm grateful, Grace, but you don't have to be humble. We are related." Grace cut her off. "Please come straight to the restaurant at precisely 7. Oh, since I have requested Richard to handle something else." Elizabeth was still perplexed once the call ended. Why the unexpected generosity of the invitation? And for what reason, except from Richard? There were countless questions, but she also began to feel a tiny glimmer of optimism. Elizabeth called Richard in the evening. "Do you think this is acceptable? Your mom all of a sudden?" "Indeed. She contacted me." There was a hint of tension in Richard's voice. "Later, I'll join you. Mother is attempting to accommodate you. Have fun." For the momentous event, Elizabeth opted for a cocktail dress in black. Her neck was exquisitely enhanced by the delicate lace at the neckline. Richard had bought her a modest diamond necklace for her birthday, which she wore with her hair up. Elizabeth felt a little more confident about her look as she stood in front of the mirror. "It will be all right," she told herself. "This may be a fresh start." A traditional stone structure, Chateau Bloom has workers in uniform at the entryway. The door was graciously opened to greet Elizabeth as she arrived. A manager in his middle years bent a little. "Elizabeth Morrison is who I am. At 7, I have a reservation." The manager's expression changed to one of recognition. "Morrison reservation. Please, this way." She was shown to a secluded room in the rear, past the opulent main dining area. Impressionist paintings graced the walls, and the foyer was softly lit by a chandelier. "Your table is here." Elizabeth walked inside a private room as the manager unlocked the door. The room she was in was deserted. 7 champagne glasses and intricate rose arrangements were placed on a wide circular table covered with a white tablecloth. However, nobody was present. "Please pardon me. Has nobody shown up yet?" Bewildered, Elizabeth asked. The manager looked at her bewilderedly. "The Morrisons are all here already. Hold on a second." Then he shut the door and walked out. Elizabeth scanned the room slowly. A tiny package was set out on the table, and she saw it. It had her name in graceful handwriting, her hands shaking. Elizabeth took the envelope in her hands. 2 paperwork dropped out as she opened it. One was a formal court filing, divorce documents. The other was a handwritten message from Grace. "Cheers to your birthday. You must leave the infertile flaw alone. Richard is able to start a family. Grace." Elizabeth's entire world came to a halt. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears as her eyesight became blurry. Richard's signature was already on the divorce papers, and there was a handwritten message from Richard on another piece of paper. "I wish to leave the Morrison family with an heir. With you, it's no longer feasible. I've already relocated to a different flat. Richard, goodbye." The papers dropped to the ground as Elizabeth's hands shook. Her cheeks were wet with hot tears. "So a 7-year marriage ends like this?" She spoke out loud. The room's air was oppressive, nearly choking her. Unconsciously caressing her ring, she fell into a chair. She could still clearly recall the hope and love she felt when she received this ring 7 years ago, and now everything had fallen apart in a flash. But in the midst of the shock and grief, another feeling started to surface. Elizabeth, weak at first, but getting stronger over time. Anger, Richard's treachery, Grace's harsh remarks, and the fact that they had selected Elizabeth's birthday for this heinous deed. She wiped away her tears and slowly got to her feet. Flaw. Her voice was small but firm as she repeated. Elizabeth suddenly felt determined. She went to the door and called the waiter by pressing the button. A young waiter showed up. "Madame, how may I assist you?" "Who is footing the bill for dinner tonight?" Calmly, Elizabeth asked. On Mr. Morrison's credit card, it has already been scheduled. The waiter answered. Elizabeth's lips formed a tiny smile. If so, I would like to order champagne and the best dinner course for one person. Of course. With a nod, the waiter departed. Returning to the table, Elizabeth took a deep breath of the flowery aroma. She tucked the divorce papers into her bag and returned them to the envelope. Silently, she reminded herself that this was not the end. This is just the start. They brought in the champagne. The glass danced with bubbles. Elizabeth stared at them as she started to think of a strategy. Her eyes had a gleam of resolve in them. It had been 3 months. Elizabeth was staring out her tiny flat window at the snow that was accumulating outside. Surprisingly, the divorce process had gone well. Everything had been handled by the Morrison family's attorney, who urged Elizabeth to sign as soon as possible in order to receive her portion of the joint property. She didn't even employ a lawyer of her own, quietly and swiftly accepting the separation from her past life. She never met Richard face to face. Everything was done through representatives. There were no messages from him, no apologies, nothing, as if their 7-year marriage had been an illusion. Elizabeth picked up her coffee cup and looked at the envelope placed on the small kitchen table in her apartment. It was addressed to Miss Elizabeth Collins after the divorce. She had reverted to her maiden name. The envelope had arrived yesterday. It was from a law firm in Seville, a small town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. She hadn't opened it yet. The phone rang, pulling Elizabeth from her thoughts. "Hi, Jennifer." It was a colleague from the publishing house. "How are you? I've been worried since I haven't seen you around. I'm fine, thank you." Elizabeth smiled. Jennifer was one of the few friends who had stood by her after the divorce. "I'm just taking a little break. I understand, but you can come back anytime. Everyone's waiting for your manuscripts." After the call ended, Elizabeth turned her attention back to the envelope. Taking a deep breath, she finally opened it. "Dear Miss Elizabeth Collins, we respectfully inform you regarding the execution of your grandmother, Edith, and Collins as well." Elizabeth's eyes widened as she read through the letter. Her grandmother, Edith, who had been like a parent to her since childhood, had passed away 5 years ago. At the time, Elizabeth thought her inheritance consisted only of a small savings account and mementos. However, according to this letter, grandmother Edith had secret assets. Investments she had started in her youth had quietly but surely grown into a substantial fortune. And Edith had named Elizabeth, her only grandchild, as the heir. Assets totaling approximately $8 million will be transferred to you through a trust fund. As per Edith's instructions, this information was not to be disclosed until you reach the age of 35. Elizabeth dropped the letter and collapsed into a chair. $8 million. The figure danced in her head. Was this a joke? But the attached documents, the lawyer's signature, everything looked genuine. The next day, Elizabeth headed to Cape Cod and met with the lawyer, Jonathan Fisher. The gentle, middle-aged man with gray hair confirmed everything. Edith was a wise woman, Jonathan said. She continued investing steadily from a young age, and her talent was remarkable. However, she always preferred a modest lifestyle and never publicized her wealth. "But why didn't she tell me?" Elizabeth asked. "When I got married, when I was getting my education, Edith wanted you to carve out your own path in life." Jonathan smiled, and she specifically added the condition about waiting until you was 35 so that this inheritance wouldn't affect your marriage. Elizabeth was enveloped in complex emotions. If she had known about this inheritance earlier, would her relationship with the Morrison family have been different? Would Grace have still looked down on her for not being from a good enough background? Would Richard have still abandoned her? No, that's not the case, she told herself. Even with money, their essential nature wouldn't have changed. Elizabeth confided in Jonathan about her recent situation, the divorce, the Morrison family's treatment, and her current circumstances. Jonathan listened to her story with empathy and understanding. "Elizabeth, you now have a wonderful opportunity to restart your life," he said. Edit. H's wish was for you to be truly happy. A few weeks later, Elizabeth made a new decision. First, she decided to get retested to determine the cause of her infertility. In the office of Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned reproductive medicine specialist in Boston, Elizabeth was informed of a shocking fact. "Elizabeth," Dr. Chen took her hand, "there's nothing wrong with you. Actually, Upon closer examination of the previous medical records, the cause of infertility was on Richard's side. What are you saying? His sperm count is extremely low, and motility is poor as well. This is a congenital issue, and the chances of conception were quite slim, Dr. Chen explained gently. These test results should have been communicated to Richard by the previous doctor. Elizabeth was stunned, but I never heard about this. Unfortunately, male infertility is often difficult for the individual to accept, especially in families that place a high value on lineage. Dr. Chen's words echoed in Elizabeth's mind. Richard had known, and so had his family, yet they had treated her as the defect for the sake of the Morrison family's male pride. Knowing this truth, something changed within Elizabeth. It wasn't sadness or anger, but a quiet sense of liberation. She no longer needed to blame herself. By spring, Elizabeth had made a big decision. She decided to open a small bookstore specializing in children's books, a dream she had long held. She rented the first floor of an old stone building in Boston's Beacon Hill district and named it Edith's Bookshelf. The name, chosen in honor of her grandmother, seemed to give her strength. The bookstore's opening was a small event, but thanks to her connections in the publishing industry, local authors also attended a reading corner for children. A cozy area with comfortable sofas and shelves lined with carefully selected children's books. Elizabeth felt like she had finally found her place. One evening, she was reading the business section of the local newspaper. There was news that Morrison Real Estate was facing a management crisis. The real estate market had cooled due to the impact of the COVID pandemic, and Harold had accumulated substantial debt from a large project. Furthermore, several investments had failed, and the company was rapidly falling into financial difficulty. Richard's name was also mentioned in the article. He had lost his position in his father's company and was looking for new employment. Also, according to rumors, he had planned to remarry a young socialite soon after the divorce. But those plans had also fallen through due to the Morrison family's economic decline. Even after reading the article, Elizabeth didn't feel any particular emotion. The anger and sadness of the past no longer dominated her heart. The past is the past, she murmured, looking out the window. Elizabeth was surrounded by a dozen children in the reading corner of Edith's bookshelf. A year had passed since her bookstore opened, and the Saturday morning reading events had become a popular local activity. As the children applauded with smiles, Elizabeth closed the book. Her bookstore had grown from a mere business into a community hub. Various events were regularly held, including readings by local authors, parent-child workshops, and special seminars for educators. That was a wonderful reading. At the quiet male voice, Elizabeth turned around. There stood a middle-aged man with a sophisticated ear, graying black hair, a gentle smile, and several children's science books in his arms. "Thank you," Elizabeth smiled. "How can I help you?" "I'm genuinely looking for books for my nephew." The man indicated the books. "He's intrigued with science, especially space. That's a good hobby. I have more well-picked novels over here." Elizabeth escorted the man to the bookshelves. The two began discussing about children's scientific books, and their conversation quickly broadened. The individual presented himself as Michael Adams, a heart surgeon at Boston General Hospital. "I've been thinking about creating a medical book," Michael remarked, "but I don't know how to express difficult medical concepts to the general people. That's a highly significant project." Elizabeth's eyes glittered. "I have editing skills, so I might be able to help." From that day on, Michael began visiting the bookshop regularly. The two enjoyed chats spanning from book selection and guidance on his medical book, endeavored to eventually more intimate issues. Elizabeth was pulled to Michael's knowledge and generosity, while Michael was taken by her strength and compassion. When Elizabeth recounted her divorce experience, Michael didn't condemn her but silently listened to her narrative. He said, "You're a really strong person to get over that experience and now be working on projects that improve the lives of others in the area where their connection was developing." Elizabeth was reviewing the finances in the bookstore's office when a surprise guest showed up. A knock on the door was heard. "Enter." Richard was standing there when the door opened. His confident look was that of a gun. His face was worn out, and he appeared to have shed a few pounds. He appeared much older than he had a year before, with tired bags under his eyes. "Elizabeth?" He stood motionless, hesitating. Are you going to listen to me? Elizabeth's chest fluttered for a second, but she soon collected herself. What are you looking for? Calmly, she inquired. I was mistaken. Richard walked in, shutting the door behind him. I want to express my heartfelt regret for the evening of your birthday. Victoria and my mother were manipulating me. Elizabeth listened to him in silence. She had never previously witnessed the feelings of sorrow and guilt in her ex-husband's face. The business is in danger of going bankrupt. Richard spoke more softly. Dad has started drinking. Her friends have abandoned Mother. Victoria has moved to Chicago to work for a tiny firm. Everything is gone, Elizabeth asked in an emotionless manner. Actually, it was my fault that we couldn't conceive. Richard's eyes went down. Bradley provided medical confirmation, but my mother advised me to keep it a secret since it was a family embarrassment. Anger, despair, and an odd sensation of release were among the many complicated emotions that affected Elizabeth's heart. However, her face stayed composed. Then I blamed you. It was your fault because of me. Richard's tone faltered. I sincerely apologize. Now I get it. You were an amazing woman. For the naive pride of my family, I threw away the best wife. Richard was going to say something else. The cell phone of Elizabeth rang. I apologize. She picked up the phone. What is it, Jessica? Miss S. Morrison is the sender. In a terrified tone, Elizabeth's secretary recounted. She reports that Bradley, her son, was admitted to the hospital due to an emergency. She hangs up and says she needs to talk to you. There was strain in Elizabeth's face. Bradley is in the hospital. Richard's face lost its color. What? What took place? The two were sent to Massachusetts General Hospital's intensive care unit. Bradley's face was pallid as he laid in bed. Grace sat at his side, looking worn out. Elizabeth. You arrived, Grace. The doctor said that his voice had lost its nobility. Bradley required dialysis due to a genetic kidney condition. The best course of therapy would be a transplant, but no family member was a suitable donor. Richard was at risk for renal illness, which had a genetic propensity in the Morrison family. We've all been put to the test. Grace's hands were shaking as she gripped a handkerchief. However, none of us get along. Through the hospital room's window, Elizabeth looked at Bradley. The only member of the Morrison family who had shown her kindness was him. What's wrong with him? Elizabeth questioned the physician. Although he is now stable in the absence of a suitable donor, his kidney function is progressively deteriorating. The doctor's speech faltered. Grace went straight to Elizabeth's bookshop the following day. She had lost her formerly respectable look. Her hair looked unkempt, and there were bags under her eyes. Elizabeth, please. Grace's voice was stuttering. Bradley, how would you feel about undergoing compatibility testing? Elizabeth turned to face her ex-mother-in-law, who had referred to her as a defect. The woman in front of her had lost her haughtiness. Morrison, Grace. She was only a mother worried about her son's survival. Why do you ask me? Silently, Elizabeth inquired. You were always sympathetic. We don't have anybody else to turn to now, and Grace dropped her eyes. Elizabeth finally made the decision to be tested after giving it much thought and spoke with Michael about it. As a physician, Michael worried about the psychological effects in her health, but he supported her choice. This is a significant choice. Her hand was held by Michael. Taking into account what they done to you, nobody would hold you responsible. But then, who would I become? Elizabeth gave a muted response. I would end up becoming like them. According to the test findings, Elizabeth was Bradley's suitable donor. A portion of her kidney might be donated. Elizabeth paid a visit to Bradley's hospital room the day before the procedure. He gave a feeble smile. You're doing this for me, but why? Bradley's voice was raspy as he asked. Forgiveness is not the point here. Elizabeth gave an honest response. I simply want to act in a humane manner. The day before the procedure. But this isn't for you or your family, she said softly to Grace. I'm merely acting in accordance with my human rights. And my last present to you is this. Following a successful procedure, Bradley started to heal. The local newspaper reported on Elizabeth's act, boosting her reputation even further. However, it was the last way she could make peace with the past. She had fully opened the door to a new life by following her own conscience. Elizabeth had been recuperating from the operation for 2 years. In addition to providing her with the proper treatment, Michael had been committed to helping her use his medical expertise, but his patience and kindness had created a deep connection in Elizabeth's heart. Are you prepared? Michael peered through the entrance to the living room. One more moment. In front of the mirror, Elizabeth was trying on pearl earrings. Her face displayed a calm contentment. The wedding ceremony between Elizabeth and Michael took place in a modest church a year ago. In the company of publishing industry colleagues, it was a heartfelt occasion. Frequent patrons of Michael's family and the bookshop. Elizabeth was carrying a bunch of flowers from her birthplace, while wearing a sophisticated yet understated ivory outfit. The two created a light-filled and spacious joint home after renovating Elizabeth's property after the wedding. Additionally, they had started a support group for infertile couples at the same time. Their efforts, which made use of Michael's medical expertise and Elizabeth's experience, were giving many people hope. Additionally, an adoption agency had brought a fresh delight into their life 6 months prior. Emma and Sophia, twin daughters, were 6 years old when they were born. After experiencing maltreatment in the past, the sisters were first cautious but eventually became receptive to Elizabeth and Michael's devoted affection. "Girls, hurry up and let's go." Elizabeth looked at the twins in their lovely outfits as she walked into the living room. "Where are we heading?" Sophia's eyes were interested as she inquired. "A unique location," Elizabeth said tactfully. "A location that holds significant memories for me." After driving downtown, the four finally pulled up in front of Chateau Bloom. Elizabeth had previously cried while eating her birthday meal by herself at the fancy restaurant. The manager gave the four a warm welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Adams. 3 years ago, he was a different person. Elizabeth saw two individuals seated at a table in the rear of the restaurant as they were being led to the main eating room. Richard and Grace were there. Richard looked obviously older, and Grace had lost her old glitz. Elizabeth caught their attention as well, and they briefly locked eyes. Elizabeth simply gave a little nod, turned aside, and went back to her family. The twin sisters were engrossed on the dessert menu in front of them when Michael softly put his hand on her shoulder. "I believed it to be the end at the moment," Elizabeth informed Michael in a low voice. "In actuality, though, it was the start of my real existence." One could sense Grace and Richard's nuanced looks from across the table. Elizabeth, however, was free of the past. She looked forward to spending joyful moments with her new family. Although the agony of the past had caused her anguish, it had also made her stronger and more understanding. Elizabeth's family's smiles were softly lit by the late summer light that came through the restaurant windows. It was the brightness of a fresh start rather than the end. Story 3. "You've wrecked our life," Dad said. "You are a burden." So I laughed and grinned. "Don't come back," my mother wrote. "My writing was passable. I just stopped covering your expenses." Then my phone blew up. "Our lives have been devastated by you. You are a burden." There was silence in the room. Like a dagger, my father's speech pierced the cacophony of the family get-together. I continued to stare at him while holding my fork. Mom gave a nod of consent. She twisted her face in disdain. "You ought to be thankful that we allowed you to live here at all," she said. I blinked. Did this actually occur? It was a true family gathering as we celebrated my uncle's birthday at his home. Around the table were relatives I hadn't seen in years. Before my folks thought it was the ideal time to make fun of me, Plates' whole discussion was humming. Even my stay with them wasn't free. In their home, I was renting a room. While my sister Emily was able to stay there for free, they charged me to rent their own son. In addition, I settled a number of their expenses: electricity and the internet, a portion of the loan. 6 years, making their lives comfortable for 6 years. And now they were behaving like I was some freeloader stealing from them in front of everyone. I should have anticipated this. They had always held me responsible for their issues. If they were stressed out, it was somehow my responsibility. If they were poor, it was because of me. I didn't feel like a son, even as a youngster, but more like a nuisance. However, this level was new. Dad didn't stop talking. "Are you aware of the amount of stress you put us under? You were a constant source of anxiety for us. Emily was always easier than you were. She is accountable. She makes wise choices. She deserves to be with us because of this. How about you?" He sneered. "Since the day of your birth, you have just been a burden on our shoulders." I turned to face Emily, as if this had nothing to do with me. She was just sitting there drinking and browsing through her phone, as if it had never happened. I smiled as I gazed at her and carefully set down my fork. Then I stood up and left the dining room without saying anything. My uncle told me, "Well, that was too much." My parents were still complaining about how unappreciative I was. Despite one of my aunt's attempts to calm them down, I was no longer concerned. I immediately walked to my room, for which I had paid rent, and retrieved my luggage from beneath the bed. My hands were trembling, but not because I was depressed. Furiously. Years of it. Years. And at last it made sense to me. I was done putting up with it. In 10 minutes I packed all I could: clothing, laptop, necessities. Later, I could purchase everything else. I had no intention of staying there for another night. My mother called my name from the hallway as I was zipping up my suitcase. I paid her no attention. I went past the dining room, past her, and down the stairs. My father turned to approach me while he was still shouting with my uncle, his face still flushed. "Where are you heading, in your opinion?" I didn't respond. I exited out the front door, got into my car, and left. That was it. I was finished. My cell phone chimed a few hours later. My mother sent me a text message: "Don't return." I was sitting in my new flat, a little studio that I had discovered earlier that evening. I had it, even if it wasn't much. No parents, no guilt, no shouting. After a few moments of staring at her message, I placed the phone down and let out a breath. I felt free for the first time in years. I wasn't finished yet, though. It was long after midnight when I finally waited. Then I composedly responded, "Okay, I just stopped paying your bills," in response. I then hit the record button on a voicemail. I said quietly, "For the past 6 years, I have been covering your costs. I won't return since you instructed me not to. Additionally, I will no longer be paying for anything. I hope that's manageable for you. I wish you luck." After hitting submit, I went to bed. My phone was overflowing with alerts when I got up the following morning. 50 calls were missed. Emily, my parents, and even a few family members. Consecutive messages, voicemails. I didn't pay attention. Then there was another message. "Where do you reside? We must speak." I realized then that this was not the end of it. The phone rang, and I let it. I didn't want to hear their opinions right away. The number of missed calls increased to 73 by midday. I had a full voicemail. I had to browse through all of my text messages since they were so stacked up. Some were expected. "What a sour brat you are. Your family cannot be subjected to this. After everything we've done for you, you owe us." The guilt trips followed. "We provided you with food, shelter, and upbringing, and you pay us back like this? Your father is under a lot of stress. He is trembling. All we wanted to do was chat. Let's resolve this." The notes from my Aunt Franklin and other family members were what truly made me think. They're in full-blown panic. "Simply speak with them. My cousin, they're freaking out, dude. They are attempting to determine your residence." I got a call from my uncle. "This is becoming unmanageable." I gazed at my computer screen. Not only were my parents upset, they were in a grave situation, and I was concerned about it. Then Emily sent me another note. "Their goal is to obtain your credit records. Take caution." I felt ill to my stomach because of that. "Get my credit reports," I fired back. "What on earth are you talking about?" She answered after a minute. "Last night, Mom asked me for your social security number. I claimed to be unaware of it, but I believe they are attempting to obtain your bank details." I let out a breath. This wasn't good. They had access to a lot of my personal information, mail, and some old documents while I lived there. They even helped me set up my internet accounts when I was a teenager. It indicated one thing: if they were now investigating my credit, they wanted to know if they could still extract something from me and how much money I had left. At that point, I made a grave error. "Tell them to back off," I texted back. My phone called once again not 5 minutes later. "Mom was the one. I'm not sure why," I said, perhaps out of curiosity. I kind of wished I could hear her writhe. Her voice burst over the speaker as soon as I responded. "What on earth are you doing?" I withdrew the phone from my ear. "What are you looking for? You have no right to treat us this way." She let out a scream. She spoke in a rough voice. "You believe you can simply leave and interrupt us? You owe us." I said nothing. "Are you aware of your actions?" She let out a scream. "Franklin, we are unable to pay our debts. You're the reason we're screwed." It dawned on me then. They missed me, but they weren't freaking out. Not because they felt horrible, but because they wanted to locate me. They couldn't afford their way of life without me. Therefore, they were in a difficult situation. I finally pulled the plug after holding them back for so long. At last, I said something. "You warned me not to return. All I'm doing is what you requested. Quiet." Then she spoke in a different tone. Sweet all of a sudden. Suddenly untrue. Listen, honey. Just let's discuss. We can resolve this. We can agree. You're where? We'll visit. Tell me where you are, please. It nearly made me chuckle. No. She yelled once more. Don't you believe you're smart? We'll track you down. Click. I ended the call. Sitting there, I gazed at the phone. My heart is racing. This was not typical conduct. Then Emily texted me again. Just now, Mom and Dad left the house. I believe they are en route to locate you. What on earth? I responded to the SMS. How? My address is unknown to them. Emily, your previous mail is with them. They are familiar with the region. I overheard Mom talking to someone on the phone. They probably engaged a private investigator. I went cold. They were making a serious effort to find me. I clenched my fists around the phone. A private detective. They're where? That desperate. I surveyed my newly furnished flat. The blinds were drawn. It felt insufficient all of a sudden, even if the doors were shut. I gave Emily a call. She immediately picked up. Tell me everything, I said. She let out a sigh. Last night, Mom gave a guy a call. She said she required an address verification, but I didn't hear it whole. She was looking through all of your old correspondence. I believe she is also attempting to locate your bank information. My chest constricted. They may have old bank statements if they had my old mail, including the details of my prior lease. How long have they been gone? 20 minutes or so, I said. She said, they're probably driving around trying to find you. I stood up and began packing my bag. Listen, Emily, you're not aware of my residence if they inquire. Of course, I said. She said. Then she paused. You really irritate them this time, even though I didn't say anything earlier. Last night, Dad punched the wall. Mom sobbed about getting even. They want more than just to talk, in my opinion. I halted my packing. Retaliation. My phone buzzed before I could ask the question. An unidentified number. Emily let out a breath. Franklin, they might have given someone your number. Take caution. I didn't pick up the phone. I got a text message from the same number a few seconds later. So that we can resolve this, you must return home. We'll find your path. A shiver went down my back. I sent Emily a text. Play dumb if they ask you anything. To solve this, I need time. You understand? She answered. I reached for my purse and keys. If they were really trying to track me down, I had to be smart. First things first. Bank accounts. I went straight to my bank. I walked up to the teller and asked to update my mailing address and security questions. I also asked if anyone had tried to access my account recently. The guy typed for a few seconds, then frowned. Yeah, he said. Someone called yesterday claiming to be you. They asked for balance information. We refused them since they didn't have the necessary security answer. My stomach turned. It was them. I updated everything, new passwords, new notifications, even two-factor authentication. As I was exiting the bank, my phone rang again. Mom was the one. I ignored it, but then I got another text. We're near. Close. I turned my head and examined the parking lot. Were they here? Then my phone buzzed again. A picture. A hazy image of my automobile. They had found me. My heart was pumping. They discovered my automobile. I surveyed the parking area. This photo was shot by someone, but I didn't see them. Were they observing me here? I tucked my phone into my pocket and hurried along. I needed to leave that place. I shut the doors, got into my car, and turned on the ignition. I backed out of the parking lot with trembling hands. Then I noticed it in my rearview mirror. At the far end of the parking lot is a black SUV. As soon as I got out, and so it was, they were pursuing me. I inhaled deeply. Remain composed. Stay away from home. In order to avoid giving them away, I drove normally. I was aware of that. However, I took a longer path and made a few arbitrary turns instead of returning to my flat. I kept the SUV with me. All right. They desired to engage in gaming. All right. I quickly turned into a petrol station that I could see up ahead. In order to follow, the SUV had to slow down. I arrived at a pump. As though I was going to fill up, I turned off the engine and opened the door. After passing past, the SUV parked near the lot's edge. Inside were two individuals. I needed to find out who they were. I went towards the station's convenience shop as though I wanted to make a purchase rather than reach for the gas pump. I glanced inside the SUV as I passed it. Dad and a stranger I didn't know. Dad looked angry from the passenger seat. The second man was in his mid-40s, bald, and had a serious expression on his face. He was driving with both hands and was looking about like a bodyguard. This man was who the devil? I watched them through the glass as I entered the store, picked out an odd snack, and made a cash payment. They remained in the vehicle. They were anticipating my arrival. I took out my phone and sent Emily a text. Dad is pursuing me. He is accompanied by a man. Who do you know? She answered right away. God, oh God. Uncle Ray has a friend like that. He engages in dubious activities. I believe he works as a bill collector. I tightened my jaw. What on earth were they doing? I returned it. Now, Emily, tell me all you know about him. I just know that, albeit not legally, he assists individuals in resolving financial issues. I felt sick to my stomach. Not in a legal sense. I needed to leave that place. Keeping my head down, I left the store and went back into my car. I didn't even get started at first. I sat there thinking that they weren't only attempting to chat. If they were prepared to bring in some dubious person, their goal was to frighten me. It might be worse. My phone then vibrated one more. This time it was from Dad. Another SMS. We'll forget this ever occurred if you come home immediately. Things will become nasty if you keep playing games. I let out a slow breath. That was it. Now they were making threats against me. I turned to face the SUV. Dad was observing me. The bald man continued to look around, as if he wanted to confirm that I had no backup. I got my car started and sped off. Just behind me, they pulled out. All right, are you up for the chase? Come on, let's do it. I abruptly turned right instead of going home. Then another. I accelerated, dodging oncoming cars. They weren't as quick, but the SUV kept up. The police station appeared in front of me. I made no hesitation at all. I parked directly in front of the entrance after pulling into the lot. The SUV decelerated. Then, suddenly it continued. Yes, I had that thinking. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel. Neither they nor I were finished. My heart was racing as I sat in the police station parking lot. I knew they weren't done, but the black SUV was gone. I was being put to the test to see how far they could push me. I wasn't going to wait for them to do something else. I pulled out my phone and sent Emily a text. All they did was try to follow me. This isn't over, even if I lost them at the police station. She answered right away. Mom was on the phone once more. They're going crazy. Dad is probably furious that you ran. I smiled. Excellent. Allow them to be angry. Then she texted again. Franklin, they're plotting something worse, I believe. We'll make sure he has no option but to return if we can't frighten him, Mom said, Dad. My stomach turned over. No option, I inquired. What does that signify? Emily inquired. They're speaking with a lawyer, but I'm not sure. An attorney? I gripped my phone as I sat there. What on earth were they attempting to do? Then I had an idea. Some of their accounts still had my name on them. They persuaded me to co-sign a few documents when I was younger. They promised to take care of things like a joint credit card and a vehicle loan. However, what if they now attempted to use it against me? I had to move quickly. As soon as I reached the counter, I headed directly to the bank. I informed them that I needed to freeze any questionable activity and unlink myself from any joint accounts. After a few minutes of typing, the teller gave me a weird look. Yesterday, an effort was made to get a loan in your name. A big one. I became icy. Was it accepted? No, she answered. They made many attempts, but they lacked the proper verification. I tightened my jaw. They were attempting to financially ensnare me and force me to return. My phone rang as I left the bank, so I shut everything down, changed passwords, froze previous accounts, and even put up fraud warnings. Emily once more. Both parents are in a panic. They recently discovered that this month's bills were not paid. I chuckled. Oh, now they're going crazy. Then she texted again. Listen, Franklin, they may attempt to legally pursue you, in my opinion. Mom said she was going to file a complaint against you. I stopped moving. Put something in the file. They could file what? Then it dawned on me. Eviction. They may attempt to lawfully evict me on paper, even though I had already left, by alleging that I owed them money for violating the lease. My credit may be ruined if they filed a complaint. Make me pay for it. Get me banned from renting anyplace else even. I responded to Emily's SMS. She answered, now find out exactly what they're doing. I'll try, but watch out, Franklin. They're totally losing it, in my opinion. I let out a breath. I had financially cut them off. They were frantic to regain control of me once I had escaped. However, I wasn't going down just yet. I didn't return home. I immediately sought legal counsel. I was prepared to play legal games with them if they so desired. I described how they had charged me rent while allowing my sister to live there for free, and how I had paid all of their bills, how they attempted to apply for loans under my name. The attorney paid close attention. She went on to say that it wouldn't stand up in court if they attempted to evict you after you had moved out. Additionally, you have the right to file charges if someone attempted to commit fraud in your name. I only needed to hear that. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt lighter when I left her office. They couldn't touch me, I knew. Then my phone buzzed as I was heading back to my car. They're going crazy, Emily Franklin. You have destroyed their life, and they are yelling about it. Grandma was even informed that you had stolen from them. I gave an eye roll. They were lying, of course. She then sent another message, though. They are aware of your residence. My chest constricted. How? Emily. I texted you back. They're on their way, but I'm not sure. They simply walked out of the home. Dad is furious. Mom is sobbing because they're going to charge you. I remained calm. I was prepared for this. I immediately returned to my flat, but I parked a block away and waited instead of entering. 20 minutes later, a black SUV did really arrive in front of my building. The bald guy, Mom and Dad. They exited and strode towards my door. Dad began beating on it while yelling my name. I took out my phone and pressed the record button. Franklin, I know you're in there. Down the street, Dad's voice could be heard. Is it your intention to just leave this family? Mom cried. This cannot be done to us. You are necessary to us. The bald man simply watched with his arms folded. After a few minutes of screaming, Dad gave the door a forceful kick. I smiled. It was there. Property destruction. I made a police call. Lights flashed 10 minutes later. My parents' attitude altered the moment they spotted the police. Mom broke down in tears, as if she were the victim. Dad attempted to accuse me of leaving them after stealing from them. I then took a step forward. I'm holding the phone. Officers, I don't live there anymore, I said. I've been followed by you, attempting to break into my flat and harassing me. I showed them everything. The footage of my father kicking in my door has been added to the texts, threats, and attempted fraud. My parents were consulted by the police. You must go immediately, sir or ma'am. Dad flushed. He is our son. We owe him. The officers gave him a head shake. No, he doesn't. And you will be arrested for trespassing if you attempt it again. The bald man remained silent. He returned to the SUV just now. Mom's face fell flat. However, we brought him up. The police looked at her. You are not entitled to his money because of it. That was the end of it. The match was over. My folks had to go. I saw them leave in their car, embarrassed. Later, Emily texted me. I believe they finally understood, albeit they're still yelling. They have finished using them. She was also correct. In years, for the first time, I had freedom.